Part 2 of the Charter of Gentile. The Charter of Gentile Liberty. James' next step is marked equally by calm wisdom and open-mindedness. He looks to God's Word as interpreted by God's deeds to throw light in turn on the deeds and to confirm the interpretation of these. Two things are to be noted in considering his quotation from Amos: its bearing on the question in hand and its divergence from the existing Hebrew text. As to the former, there seems at first sight nothing relevant to James' purpose in the quotations, but simply declares that the Gentiles will seek the Lord when the fallen tabernacle of David is rebuilt. That period of time has at least begun, thinks James. And the works of Jesus in whom they... right there's your... In the works of Jesus, in whom the decayed dominion of David is again in higher form established, the return of Gentiles is not merely synchronized with, but in the intense issue of Christ's reign. Lifted from the earth, he will draw all men unto him, and they shall seek the Lord, and unto them his name will be called. And no, I did not open it from the bottom. That's whoever opened it originally did. I didn't. Anybody want some Cocoa Krispies? They're good. Really good. Now, the force of this quotation lies as... You got it? Oh, we gotta... Oh, here you guys go. Now, the force... Here, put this over there. See, Emos come in handy for chip clip bags. When your chip clip bags, seeing that they're plastic and they break, Emos are better chip clip bags. There you go. Now, the fourth, just set it over there, buddy. Don't worry about trying to put it back in the box. Now, the force of this quotation lies, as it seems, first in the fact that Peter's experience at Caesarea is to be taken as an indication on how God means the prophecy to be fulfilled, namely without circumcision, and secondly in the argumentum a silentio, since the prophet says nothing about ritual or the like, but declares that moral and spiritual qualifications on the one hand, a true desire after God, and on the other, receiving the proclamation of his name and calling themselves by it, are all that are needed to make Gentiles God's people. Just because there is nothing in the prophecy about observing Jewish ceremonies and doing something about longing and faith, James thinks that these are the essentials and that the others may be dropped by the church, as God had dropped them in the case of Cornelius, and Amos had dropped them in his vision of the future kingdom. God knew what he meant to do when he spoke through the prophet, and what he has done has explained the words, as James says in verse 18. The variation from the Hebrew text requires a word of comment. The quotation is substantially from the Septuagint with a slight alteration. probably James quoted the version familiar to many of his hearers. It seems to have been made from a somewhat different Hebrew text in verse 17, but the difference is very much slighter than an English reader would suppose. Our text has Edom, where the Septuagint has men, but the Hebrew words without vowels are identical, but for the addition of one letter in the former. Our text has inherit, where the speculate has seek after. But there again, the difference in the two Hebrew words would be one letter only. Yeah, I can say Septuagint, but I can't say would be one letter only. So that there may well have been a various reading as preserved in the Septuagint and Acts. James adds to the Septuagint, seek the eventually correct completion, the Lord. Alright, in 6 minutes, alright. Now it is obvious that even if we suppose his rendering of the whole verse to be a paraphrase of the same Hebrew text as we have, it is a correct representation of the meaning, for the inheriting of Edom is no mere external victory, and Edom is always in the Old Testament the type of the godless man. The conquest of the Gentiles by the restorer of David's tabernacle is really the seeking after the Lord and the calling of his name upon the Gentiles. The conclusion drawn by James is full of practical wisdom and would have saved the church from many a sad page in its history if its spirit had been prevalent in later councils. Note how the very designation given to the Gentile converts in version 19 carries augmentative force. They turn to God from among the Gentiles. If they have done that, surely their new separation and new attachment are enough, and make insistence on circumcision indefinitely ridiculous. They have the thing signified. What does it matter about the sign, which is good for us Jews, but needless for them? If church rulers had always been as open-eyed as this bishop in Jerusalem, and had been content if people were joined to God and parted from the world, what torrents of blood, what frowning walls of division, what scandals and partings of brethren would have been spared? It's true. The observance suggested are a portion of the precepts enjoyed by Judaism on proselytes. The two formers were necessary to the Christian life. The two latter were not, but were concession of the Jewish feelings of the stricter party. The conclusion may be called a compromise, but it was one dictated by the desire for unity and had nothing unworthy in it. There should be giving and taking on both sides. If the Jewish Christians made the to them immense concession of waiving the necessity, if the Jewish Christians made to them immense concession of waiving the necessity of circumcision, the Gentile section might surely make the same one of abstinence from things strangled and from blood. Some similarities in diet would daily assimilate the lives of the two parties and would be a more visible and continuous token of their oneness in the single act of circumcision. But what does the reason in verse 21 mean? Why should the reading of Moses every Sabbath be a reason for these concessions? Various answers are given, but the most natural is that a constant promulgation of the law made respect for the feeling, even if mistaken, of Jewish Christians at visible, and the course suggested the most likely to win Jews who were not yet Christians. Both classes would be flung farther apart if there were not some yielding. The general principle involved is that one cannot be too tender with odd. I can see it there. It says old, but I want to say odd. That one cannot be too tender with old and deeply rooted convictions.
Mommy, I had this on the floor last night.
Did you?
All night.
Wow.
And the cats didn't even get it.
That's good.
And swallowed it.
And that's good. That'd be hard for them to swallow. Cannot be too tender with old and deeply rooted convictions, even if they be prejudiced. And that Christian charity, which is truest wisdom, will concess to limitations of Christian liberty. If thereby any little one who believes in him shall be saved from being offended, or any unbeliever from being repelled. One more? Nope. Alright, so that's part 2 of the Charter of Gentile Liberator. And I shall be back, my brothers and sisters. It's kind of interesting to find out how us Gentiles came out. How us Gentiles came about. Because we're not Hebrew. I'm not Jewish. Would I like to learn more about the Jewish faith and that? Oh yeah, I'm not saying that I wouldn't. Of course, I'd like to know more about every faith. Except atheism. I think that's the only faith that I don't want to learn any more about, because I've seen enough of it. I have an atheistic for a son-in-law, and I worry about my daughter-in-law still, believe me. But now his mother is heavy in the church, so it's really, really surprising to have an atheistic for a son-in-law, with how much his mom is in the church and how much his father was. But I've gone as far as I can with him. You can only lead a horse to water. He at least does respect me enough to not use the GD around me, so, you know, you can only do so much with people. You can't change their opinions. You cannot change what they think or how they feel. That's the hard part. So, alright, my brothers and sisters, I shall be back with part 3. It's getting interesting, so I love you. Peace be with you. Keep safe.
No,